Michael Donovan had always believed in the rhythm of life. At 58, he'd settled into a comfortable cadence teaching music theory at the local community college, playing piano at Rosewood's only upscale restaurant on Friday nights, and spending quiet weekends with Eleanor, his wife of 32 years. Their life together had the familiar flow of a well-practiced sonata, each day moving predictably into the next. That Tuesday evening in April began like any other. Michael returned home from his evening class, the spring air carrying the scent of blooming dogwoods as he walked up the driveway of their colonial-style home. The house they'd purchased 27 years ago when his career as a concert pianist had given way to teaching, when Eleanor's law practice was just beginning to flourish, when they still believed children would eventually complete their family. "El?" he called out, setting his leather messenger bag on the entryway bench. No answer. He loosened his tie and made his way to the kitchen, where a note sat on the granite countertop. Meeting with client running late. Don't wait up. Love. E. Michael sighed, pouring himself a glass of Cabernet. These late meetings had become more frequent over the past few months. He understood the demands of her corporate law practice, the same demands that had supported them when his own career took a different path than they'd planned. Still, something felt off-key lately, a dissonance he couldn't quite place. He settled at his baby grand in the living room, fingers finding their way to Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that always centered him. As he played, his phone buzzed with a text, probably Eleanor letting him know she'd be even later. He finished the piece before checking, but it wasn't from Eleanor. It was from David Harmon, his department chair and closest friend. "Call me when you get a chance. Important." Michael frowned. David rarely texted this late unless it was about department business that couldn't wait. He dialed the number. Michael chuckled. "Well, she did say she had a client meeting. Their osso buco is excellent for..." "She's not with a client, Mike." David's voice dropped. "She's with Robert Caldwell." The name hit Michael like a wrong note in a familiar melody. Robert Caldwell, the managing partner at Eleanor's firm, 15 years younger than Michael, recently divorced. "They might be discussing a case," Michael said, but even as the words left his mouth, he felt their hollowness. "Mike." David hesitated. "They're in the back booth, the one where you can't see from the entrance. They're holding hands across the table. She just kissed him." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I have to go," Michael said, ending the call. He sat motionless at the piano, staring at the black and white keys. The instrument that had been his constant companion through life's highs and lows now seemed to mock him with its silence. 32 years of marriage, 3 decades of building a life together, and now this discordant revelation threatened to unravel everything. Michael didn't confront Eleanor that night. When she slipped into bed at 11:30, he pretended to be asleep, his back to her side of the bed. He needed time to process, to understand. Maybe David had misinterpreted what he saw. Maybe there was an explanation that wouldn't shatter their life together. But in the harsh light of morning, doubt had taken root. As Eleanor dressed for work, he noticed details he'd overlooked before. The new perfume, the subtle highlights in her silver-streaked hair, the tailored clothes that had gradually replaced her practical suits. "You're quiet this morning," she remarked, applying lipstick at her vanity. The Westridge acquisition is more complicated than we anticipated." She met his eyes in the mirror. "Everything okay?" "Fine," he lied. "Just thinking about the department budget meeting today." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Millers on Friday." "Right." The normalcy of the conversation felt surreal against the backdrop of what he now suspected. After Eleanor left, Michael called in sick to the college, something he'd done perhaps 3 times in his entire career. Then he did something he'd never imagined doing. He began to search for evidence. He felt like an intruder in his own home as he checked Eleanor's desk in the study. Nothing unusual in the drawers. Her laptop was password protected, and he didn't know the code, a small barrier that suddenly seemed significant. Had there always been this distance between them, these small secrets? Michael moved to their bedroom, hesitating before opening Eleanor's side of the closet. The guilt of invading her privacy warred with his need to know the truth. Inside, hanging in the bag behind winter coats, was a garment bag he didn't recognize. He unzipped it to find a red, dress-sleek, expensive, nothing like Eleanor's usual conservative attire. In the pocket of the dress, he found a hotel keycard. The Parkview Hotel downtown. Not a place for client meetings. Nos. His hands trembled as he replaced everything exactly as he'd found it. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was adding up to a conclusion he couldn't ignore. The late nights. The new clothes. The secretive behavior. That afternoon, he drove downtown and parked across from Eleanor's law firm. He felt ridiculous, like a character in some tawdry drama, but he needed to see for himself. At 5:45, Eleanor emerged from the building alongside a tall man with salt-and-pepper hair, Robert Caldwell. They walked close but not touching, maintaining professional distance, until they reached the parking garage. Just before entering, Robert's hand brushed against Eleanor's back in a gesture of intimacy that was unmistakable. Michael drove home in a daze, the city blurring around him. In their 32 years together, he'd never once doubted Eleanor's fidelity. They'd weathered career disappointments, the heartbreak of infertility, the death of parents, all the trials that long marriages face. Through it all, they'd been a team. Or so he'd believed. Late evening, he sat at the piano again, but no music came. Instead, he found himself scrolling through photos on his phone. Eleanor and him in Paris for their 25th anniversary, at his mother's funeral, at faculty Christmas parties. Happy moments captured in time, now called into question. When Eleanor texted that she'd be working late again, Michael replied with a simple, "Okay." Then he poured another glass of wine and began to formulate a plan. He wouldn't confront her with suspicions and circumstantial evidence. If their marriage was ending, he deserved the dignity of knowing exactly what he was facing. The next day, Michael met David for lunch at a cafe far from campus, away from curious colleagues. David frowned. "Mike, are you sure that's the way to go? Maybe you should just talk to her." "And give her the chance to lie? To make me doubt what I know?" Michael shook his head. "I need proof, David. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." David sighed. "My nephew works in IT security. He might be able to help." "But Mike, this isn't you. The sneaking around, the spying." "Neither is being made a fool of by my wife of 32 years, Michael replied, his voice sharp. "I never thought I'd be here either, but here we are." That weekend, with Eleanor at what she claimed was a professional conference in Chicago, Michael met David's nephew in a coffee shop. The young man barely looked at Michael as he explained how to install a monitoring app on Eleanor's phone, if Michael could get access to it for just 5 minutes. "It'll back up all her texts, emails, photos to this account," he explained, scribbling login information on a napkin. "But you didn't get this from me." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Sunday evening, Eleanor returned from her conference, looking refreshed and relaxed. She took a shower while Michael prepared dinner, leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. His hands shook as he installed the app, following the instructions precisely. Just as he finished and returned the phone to its exact position, the shower turned off upstairs. Over dinner, Eleanor talked about the conference sessions, the networking opportunities, the hotel accommodations. Each detail was delivered with the precision of a well-rehearsed testimony. Michael nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while wondering if anything she was saying was true. That night, after Eleanor had fallen asleep, Michael sat in his study with his laptop open to the monitoring account. The first messages appeared, conversations between Eleanor and Robert Caldwell that left no room for doubt. Interspersed with these were practical arrangements, meeting times, hotel reservations, excuses to be crafted. Reading them was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying but impossible to look away from. Natia. The affair had been going on for 7 months. 7 months of lies. 7 months of Michael, living in ignorance while his wife built a separate life. What cut deepest were the messages where Eleanor talked about Michael, her guilt, her rationalization that he was too absorbed in his music to notice her unhappiness, her belief that what Michael didn't know wouldn't hurt him. For 3 days, Michael lived with his knowledge, watching Eleanor move through their home like an actress on a stage, playing the role of devoted wife while he now saw through the performance. Each kiss goodbye, each casual touch, each I love you felt like a fresh betrayal. He continued checking the monitoring app, gathering more evidence, watching as Eleanor and Robert planned their next rendezvous for Friday evening, the same night they were supposed to have dinner with the Millers. On Thursday night, Michael sat at the piano, playing Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata with an intensity that surprised even him. The music had always been his emotional outlet, and tonight he poured all his anger, betrayal, and grief into the keys. Eleanor paused in the doorway, watching him. "That was beautiful," she said when he finished. "I haven't heard you play like that in years." Michael closed the piano lid gently. "I've been feeling inspired lately." She smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing within him. "The Millers are looking forward to tomorrow. Janet said she's making that chocolate torte you love." "About that," Michael said, his voice steady, "I was thinking we could go out instead. Just the two of us." "I know, but I made reservations at Marcello's, that Italian place downtown, the one with the private booths in the back." He watched her face carefully. "I thought it would be nice to have a date night. It's been a while." A flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossed Eleanor's features before she composed herself. "That's sweet, but Janet will be disappointed." "I already called them," Michael lied. "They understood, said we could reschedule for next weekend." Eleanor seemed to struggle internally before nodding. "Okay, Marcello's it is." "Actually," Eleanor said quickly, "could we make it 8 o'clock? I have a brief I need to finish before the weekend." The next day crawled by. Michael taught his classes mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Students noticed his distraction, but he brushed off their concerns. By the time he returned home to change for dinner, he felt hollowed out, as if he'd already lived through the confrontation 1,000 times in his mind. Eleanor was already dressed when he arrived, not in the red dress from the garment bag, but in an elegant black one he recognized. Playing it safe, he thought bitterly. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. Even now, knowing what he knew, he could still appreciate the woman who had been his partner for over 3 decades. "Thank you," she replied, adjusting her earrings. "You're not wearing that, are you?" Michael looked down at his usual blazer and slacks. "What's wrong with this?" "Right." Michael changed into a suit she'd bought him last Christmas. The irony wasn't lost on him. They drove to the restaurant in separate cars, Eleanor claiming she might need to stop by the office afterward to pick up files, another lie to add to the growing collection. Marcella's was busy for a Friday night. The maitre d' led them to a booth in the main dining area, not the secluded section in the back. Michael nodded, knowing exactly who had reserved at least one of them. "This is fine, then." They ordered wine and appetizers, making small talk that felt like a foreign language to Michael now. He watched Eleanor check her phone repeatedly, her eyes darting to the entrance every time the door opened. Michael took a sip of his wine. "You know, I was thinking about Paris today, our anniversary trip." Eleanor smiled, seemingly relieved by the safe topic. "That was a wonderful trip. Remember how we got lost in Montmartre, wandered for hours before finding our way back, and stopped at that little cafe with the incredible chocolate mousse?" Eleanor added, her smile genuine now. Michael withdrew his hand and reached into his jacket pocket, removing his phone. "Because I think you have other plans for the future." He placed the phone on the table, opened to screenshots of her messages with Robert. 7 months, he said, his voice low but intense. 7 months of lies, of sneaking around, of making me believe our marriage was still intact while you were building a life with him. Where would you prefer? At home, where you've been lying to my face every day? Or perhaps at the Parkview Hotel, where you've been meeting him? Does it matter? Michael cut her off. What matters is that while I've been planning our future, you've been dismantling our past. Then explain it to me. Help me understand how 32 years of marriage can be thrown away for, what, excitement? Novelty? A man who won't even take you to dinner in public? None of this is fair, Elle. Michael's voice cracked slightly. I gave you my life, my trust, everything I am. And I gave you mine, Eleanor countered, a flash of anger breaking through her guilt. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. When was the last time you really looked at me, Michael? Really asked what I wanted, what I needed? No, she said quickly. No, the affair is on me. I made that choice, and it was wrong. But our marriage was broken long before Robert. Michael shook his head. If it was broken, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you ask for counseling, for changes, for anything before jumping into another man's bed? Eleanor wiped away a tear. I tried. In my way. But you were so content with our routine, with your music and your students. I didn't want to disrupt your happiness. So instead, you shattered it completely. Michael laughed bitterly. How considerate. A waiter approached their table, sensed the tension, and quickly retreated. In the awkward silence that followed, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text. They both knew who it was from. Het. Go ahead, Michael said. Tell him you'll be late. Or that you can't make it at all tonight. I'm sure he'll understand. She took a deep breath. The truth is that I do love you. I always have. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself in our marriage. Robert made me feel seen again. Valued for more than just being your wife. The supportive partner to the brilliant musician. Michael stared at her, this woman he thought he knew better than anyone. Is it over? I see, he said, standing up. Well, don't let me keep you from your plans for the evening. I'm sure Robert is waiting. I'll be staying at David's tonight. Take whatever time you need to pack some things. I'd prefer you weren't at the house when I return tomorrow. He placed money on the table for the untouched appetizers and walked out, ignoring Eleanor's calls behind him. In the parking lot, he paused, leaning against his car as the weight of what had just happened hit him fully. Michael spent the weekend at David's house, alternating between numb silence and bursts of raw emotion. David gave him space when he needed it and company when the solitude became too much. Minnie, what are you going to do? David asked on Sunday morning as they sat on his deck, coffee growing cold between them. Michael stared at the neighbors' children playing in their yard. I don't know. Get a divorce, I suppose. What's the alternative? Stay with someone who's in love with another man? Who's been lying to me for months? Michael shook his head. I can't do that, David. I can't live like that. When Michael returned home that afternoon, Eleanor had indeed cleared out some of her things. She'd left her key on the kitchen counter, along with a handwritten note. I know words are inadequate, but I am truly sorry for the pain I've caused. You deserve better than this. Better than me. I'm staying with Janet for now. When you're ready to talk about practical arrangements, please let me know. Michael crumpled the note and threw it across the room. Practical arrangements? As if they were discussing a business dissolution rather than the end of a lifetime together. The house felt cavernous without Eleanor's presence. Every room held memories now tainted by betrayal. The kitchen where they'd cooked countless meals together, the living room where they'd entertained friends, the bedroom where they'd shared their most intimate moments. Michael wandered from room to room, finally ending up at his piano. He sat down but didn't play. For the first time in his life, music offered no solace. The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations and practical matters. Michael learned about divorce proceedings, asset division, and the cold mechanics of undoing a life built together. He took a leave of absence from teaching, unable to focus on students when his own life was in shambles. Friends and colleagues reacted with shock when news of the separation spread. Most expressed sympathy and support for Michael, though he noticed some awkward silences that suggested Eleanor's affair might not have been as secret as he'd thought. A pause. I suspected something was wrong, she admitted. Eleanor had been different lately, but she never confided in me about an affair. She's my friend too, Michael. What she did was wrong, but she's hurting as well. Yes, she did, Janet agreed softly. And now, you both have to live with it. 3 weeks after the confrontation at Marcello's, Eleanor asked to meet to discuss the house. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop near the college where neither of them were regulars. Michael arrived first, choosing a table in the corner. When Eleanor walked in, he was struck by how different she looked. Thinner, paler, her usual confident posture diminished. A small, petty part of him was satisfied to see her suffering too. Yes, Eleanor placed a folder on the table. I've been looking at our finances. I think the fairest thing would be to sell it and split the proceeds. The fairest thing, Michael repeated, would have been not to cheat on your husband of 32 years. I don't hate you, Michael interrupted. That's the worst part. I wish I could hate you. It would be easier. And yet here we are. Michael opened the folder, focusing on the documents inside rather than the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I don't want to sell the house. Eleanor reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. That's not true. You have your music, your students, your friends. Don't, Michael warned. Don't pretend to care about what I have or don't have. The confirmation shouldn't have hurt. He already knew the answer, but it did. Then your caring means nothing to me. He stood to leave, but Eleanor caught his arm. Wait. There's something else. Robert's firm is opening a branch in Boston. He's been asked to head it up. Eleanor took a deep breath. He's asked me to go with him. Michael laughed bitterly. How convenient for you. A fresh start while I'm left to pick up the pieces. None of this is fair, Eleanor. Michael stood again. Take whatever you want from the house before you go. I don't care anymore. This time, he did leave, walking out into the bright spring day that seemed to mock his dark mood. Eleanor was moving on, building a new life with her lover, while Michael was left with the ruins of the old one. That night, for the first time since the confrontation, Michael sat at his piano and played, not the classical pieces he usually favored, but a raw, improvised melody that expressed his grief, his anger, his sense of abandonment. He played until his fingers ached, and tears blurred his vision, the music saying what words could not. Hasso. When he finally stopped, exhausted, the house was silent around him. But something had shifted. The music had done what it had always done for him, provided a path through pain. Not around it, but through it. Michael went to bed that night with a new resolve forming. Eleanor had made her choice. Now it was time for him to make his. In the weeks that followed, Michael threw himself into reclaiming his life. He returned to teaching, finding solace in the structured environment of the classroom and the enthusiasm of his students. He began playing piano at Rosewood's restaurant again on Friday nights, his performances drawing larger crowds as word spread about the emotional depth he now brought to the music. Eleanor moved most of her remaining belongings out of the house while Michael was at work, leaving only furniture and shared items they would need to discuss. They communicated primarily through lawyers now, the divorce proceedings moving forward with clinical efficiency. Michael had decided to fight for the house, taking on extra piano students and applying for a promotion to department chair when David announced his retirement. The additional income would allow him to buy out Eleanor's share over time. One evening, as Michael was grading theory exams in his study, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Janet Miller standing on his porch, holding a casserole dish. Janet headed straight for the kitchen, setting down the dish and turning on the oven without asking. Managing isn't thriving, Michael. And from what I hear at your Friday performances, you deserve to thrive. Michael leaned against the counter, watching her move efficiently around his kitchen, a space that had once been Eleanor's domain. You've been to the restaurant? I sat in the back. Janet pulled plates from the cabinet. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, given the circumstances. No, but I am housing the woman who broke your heart. Janet turned to face him. For what it's worth, I don't think she's happy, Michael. Not really. No, just an observation. Janet checked the oven temperature. 10 more minutes for the casserole. Do you have wine? They ate dinner together, carefully avoiding the topic of Eleanor and instead discussing Janet's garden, Michael's students, and the latest town gossip. It was the first normal social interaction Michael had experienced in months, and he found himself genuinely laughing at Janet's stories about her husband's disastrous attempt at homebrewing. Thank you for this, Michael said as they finished. I didn't realize how much I needed. Normalcy. Janet smiled. That's what friends are for. And speaking of friends, a group of us are going to the symphony in Hartford next weekend. You should join us. It's Brahms, your favorite. Janet stood to clear the plates. Think about it. The invitation stands. After Janet left, Michael sat at the piano again, playing softly as he considered her invitation. The thought of socializing, of being part of a group where everyone would know about his failed marriage, was daunting. But the alternative, continuing his self-imposed isolation, suddenly seemed worse. The symphony outing marked a turning point. Michael found himself welcomed back into the social circle he and Eleanor had shared, with friends making a conscious effort to include him in gatherings. Some were awkward at first, unsure how to navigate the new dynamic, but most were genuinely supportive. As May turned to June, Michael received an unexpected call from Robert Caldwell's ex-wife, Diane. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, she said, after introducing herself. I thought you might understand better than most what I went through last year. Yes, though in my case it was his administrative assistant. Diane's laugh held no humor. So cliché, right? I'm sorry for what you're going through now. Diane paused. I wanted you to know that it does get better. Not right away, and not in a straight line, but eventually. Also, Diane continued, I thought you should know that Robert has a pattern. This isn't the first time he's done this, and Eleanor won't be the last woman he discards when someone newer comes along. Michael closed his eyes. Despite everything, the thought of Eleanor being hurt again caused him pain. Why are you telling me this? Because when it happened to me, I wish someone had warned me about who Robert really was. And because I thought you might take some comfort in knowing that what's happening isn't about you being inadequate. It's about him being incapable of commitment. After hanging up, Michael sat for a long time, processing Diane's words. There was indeed a certain vindication in knowing that Robert's character, not his own failings, had led to this situation. But he also felt a surprising concern for Eleanor, who was building a new life on such a precarious foundation. That evening, Michael received an email from Eleanor with the subject line Boston. Inside was a brief message. I wanted you to hear this from me rather than through the grapevine. Robert and I will be moving to Boston at the end of the month. I've accepted a position at his firm's new branch. I've instructed my lawyer to be as accommodating as possible regarding the house. You're right, it should stay with you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if you could find it in your heart to meet with me one more time before I go, I would be grateful. Michael stared at the screen, conflicting emotions washing over him. Part of him wanted to ignore the request, to let Eleanor leave without the closure she sought. But another part, the part that had loved her for over 3 decades, couldn't deny her this final conversation. He replied with a single line, Saturday, 2 p.m., at the park bench by the lake. The day of their meeting dawned clear and warm, a perfect June afternoon. Michael arrived early, sitting on the bench where he and Eleanor had often come to feed the ducks and watch the sunset in their early years together. He saw her approaching from the parking lot, her silver-streaked hair catching the sunlight, her step hesitant. She wore a simple sundress he recognized from years before, not one of her new, expensive outfits. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting beside him but maintaining a careful distance. Michael nodded, looking out at the lake rather than at her. "You're really going through with it? Boston?" "Yes." Eleanor followed his gaze to the water. "The movers come next week." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of children playing and ducks quacking, filling the space between them. "Why did you want to see me, Eleanor?" Michael finally asked. "What's left to say?" Eleanor turned to face him. "I needed to tell you something, and I couldn't do it in an email or through lawyers." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Michael. Truly deeply sorry for what I did to you, to us." "I know, but I don't think you believed me." Eleanor's voice wavered. "I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away, what I destroyed. Because I don't want you to spend years thinking you weren't enough. You were. You are." A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. "The failure was mine, not yours." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "Nothing I can say will undo the hurt I've caused. I couldn't leave without telling you that what happened wasn't because you were lacking in any way." Eleanor wiped away her tears. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of growing old, of becoming invisible, of having nothing to show for my life but a successful career and a stable marriage." They should have been. A wiser woman would have recognized the value of what she had. Eleanor looked down at her hands. "Instead, I grasped at something that made me feel young and desired again, without considering the cost." Michael absorbed her words, recognizing the truth in them. Eleanor had always feared aging, had always sought validation in her accomplishments and appearance. It didn't excuse her betrayal, but it helped him understand it. "To warn me. Or maybe to warn you, through me." Michael watched Eleanor's expression carefully. "She says Robert has a history of this. Of pursuing married women, making grand promises, then moving on when the excitement fades." Eleanor's face paled slightly, but she lifted her chin. "I know about his past. He's been honest with me." "Has he?" Michael doubted it, but didn't press the point. "Well, I hope for your sake that people can change." "They can," Eleanor said softly. "I have. This experience. It's forced me to confront parts of myself I'm not proud of." Michael nodded, surprised to find he believed her. "I hope you find what you're looking for in Boston, Eleanor. I really do." "Thank you." Eleanor hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. "I wanted to give you this. I found it when I was packing." Michael took the box and opened it. Inside was a worn piano key, a souvenir from his first professional piano, which had been damaged beyond repair during a move early in their marriage. He'd kept this single key as a memento, but had thought it lost years ago. "I found it in the attic," Eleanor explained, "in a box of keepsakes. I thought you should have it." Eleanor stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Goodbye, Michael. I wish you all the happiness you deserve." Michael watched her walk away, a figure growing smaller against the backdrop of the park until she disappeared from view. He sat for a long time afterward, the piano key in his hand, feeling something shift within him, not forgiveness exactly, but a loosening of the anger that had gripped him for months. That evening he played at the restaurant with a new piece he'd composed himself, a melody that spoke of loss and betrayal, but also of resilience and the possibility of renewal. The audience responded with a standing ovation, many wiping away tears. Afterward, as he was packing up his sheet music, a woman approached the piano, perhaps in her early 50s, with warm brown eyes and a hesitant smile. Michael considered for a moment. "I'm calling it The Silence Between Notes." The woman nodded as if she understood perfectly. "I'm Catherine, by the way. I teach literature at the college." They chatted for a few minutes about the college, about music and literature, and the conversation flowed with surprising ease. As Catherine prepared to leave, she hesitated. "I don't usually do this, but would you like to get coffee sometime? To continue our conversation about the intersection of music and literature?" Michael felt a moment of panic, followed by a realization. This was what moving forward looked like. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something new, something different. 2 years later, Michael stood in the wings of the college auditorium, watching as his students prepared for the annual faculty-student showcase. As department chair, he'd expanded the event to include collaborative performances between students and professors, making it one of the highlights of the academic year. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on a foundation of shared interests and mutual respect. Catherine had been patient with Michael's hesitations and understanding of his past wounds. In return, he'd learned to open himself to the possibility of trust again, to the risk of caring deeply for someone new. They weren't living together yet. Both valued their independence too much for that, but they spent most weekends at one house or the other, building a relationship that felt both familiar and excitingly different from what Michael had known before. As the showcase began, Michael watched his students perform with pride. When it was his turn to take the stage, he settled at the grand piano and looked out at the audience. Catherine sat in the front row, alongside David and Janet. Further back, he spotted other friends and colleagues who had supported him through the darkest period of his life. "This piece is called The Silence Between Notes," he announced. "It's about loss, but also about what we find in the spaces left behind." As he played, Michael reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. The divorce had been finalized without drama, Eleanor honoring her promise to be accommodating about the house. She and Robert had moved to Boston as planned, and Michael had heard through mutual friends that they were still together, though not yet married. He had received a Christmas card from Eleanor last year, a simple note wishing him well, with no return address. He'd appreciated the gesture, but hadn't responded. Some chapters were better left closed. The melody flowed from his fingers, evolving from the raw emotion of its original composition into something more nuanced, a piece that acknowledged pain without being defined by it. As he reached the final movement, Michael improvised slightly, adding a new motif that spoke of possibility and hope. When the last note faded, there was a moment of silence before the audience erupted in applause. Michael stood and bowed, his eyes finding Catherine's in the front row. Her smile told him she'd noticed a change in the composition, understood what it meant. After the showcase, as they walked back to Michael's house hand in hand under a canopy of summer stars, Catherine asked. The ending was different tonight, new. At home, they sat on the porch swing, listening to the night sounds and enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Michael thought about how different this relationship was from his marriage. Not better or worse, just different. With Eleanor, there had been the passion and intensity of young love, the deep intertwining of lives over decades. With Catherine, there was a mature appreciation of each other's separate identities, a conscious choice to be together, rather than an assumption. I got some news today, Catherine said, breaking the silence. The university press wants to publish my book on musical influences in 20th century literature. I was thinking the same thing. Catherine turned to face him. How would you feel about celebrating in Paris? I have a conference there in October, and I thought maybe you could join me. We could extend the trip, make it a vacation. Paris, the city where he and Eleanor had celebrated their 25th anniversary. The city they'd promised to revisit for their 35th, a promise now broken. Catherine must have sensed his hesitation. If it's too soon, or if you'd rather go somewhere else. No, Michael interrupted, making a decision. Paris sounds perfect. I'd love to show you some of my favorite spots there. I'm sure. And he was. Paris didn't belong to his past with Eleanor. It belonged to the world, to anyone who loved its beauty and history, including him and Catherine. Later that night, as Catherine slept beside him, Michael thought about the path that had led him here. From the devastating discovery of Eleanor's betrayal, through the dark months of anger and grief, to this new chapter that he could never have imagined 2 years ago. The betrayal would always be part of his story, a scar that had changed him irrevocably. But it no longer defined him. What defined him now were the choices he'd made in its aftermath. To rebuild, to risk trusting again, to find joy in the life he had rather than mourning the one he'd lost. In the morning, Michael woke before Catherine and slipped downstairs to the piano. In the quiet dawn light, he began to compose a new piece, one that had been forming in his mind for weeks. Not about betrayal or loss this time, but about second chances and the courage to embrace them. As the melody took shape under his fingers, Michael felt a sense of peace wash over him. The music would always be there, helping him navigate life's dissonance and harmony alike. And now, so would Catherine. Not as a replacement for what he'd lost, but as a beautiful, unexpected gift in the next movement of his life's composition. When she came downstairs an hour later, drawn by the music, Michael looked up and smiled. "Good morning. Good morning," Catherine replied, coming to sit beside him on the piano bench. "That's beautiful. Does it have a name yet?" Michael considered for a moment, then nodded. "I'm calling it the space between stars." "I love it," Catherine said, resting her head on his shoulder as he continued to play. Outside, the sun rose fully, casting golden light through the windows of the house that had once witnessed the end of one love story, and now bore witness to the beginning of another. Different, unexpected, but no less precious for being unplanned. And in that moment, Michael knew with certainty that he had not just survived betrayal, he had transcended it.